So I'm at the Desert Botanical Gardens this weekend with Lauren because we
Yeah.
wanted to see the pretty blooms. And a volunteer docent comes past wearing a t-shirt that says volunteer docent.
Yeah.
And I turned to Lauren and I said, you know what they say, a docent man is hard to find. And she kind of punched me on the shoulder. And
That's
we
very
continued
disappointing.
walking and we saw another person, another docent. And I said, you think if they order in bulk, those shirts are cheaper by the docent? And she was like, I will literally leave you. And I said,
Yeah,
okay.
I
And we
think she
keep walking and we see another. And I said, I take it you're not a fan of dose jokes. And she just walked away from me and didn't come
yeah,
back.
I think she should dump you, honestly, for that one.
That's how my relationships go.
Welcome back to Wow No Do These Guys. I'm Naomi Guy,
I'm that guy, Joel guy.
and you're listening to a podcast where we talk about sex, dating, relationships, and most importantly, how not to die alone. That's right, we're on part 3 of How Not to Die Alone because Naomi had to cut short the last episode because she got food poisoning in the middle of the recording.
Nice. Hey, Naomi,
Yeah.
besides talking about sex, dating, relationships, we also sometimes talk about awesome drinks. And I have to wonder, do you have an awesome drink for today's recording?
No, because of my food poisoning, I'm trying to limit the amount of weird drinks I put in my body, and the only ones we have in the cabinet right now, specifically for the podcast, are gravy flavored. So I'm just gonna stick with water this time.
Oh, we got rid of that one. Well, I am drinking the Ito In Jinky Vitamin C 1000 milligram immunity calamansi beverage. So it's calamansi, which is a Japanese citrus. It has lots of vitamin C, so it either will give me superpowers or just keep me from getting sick.
I'm hoping that everyone knows in this recording that janky is spelled with a G, not a J. It's not like
Oh, that's
jinkies.
that's a good point. This kind of sucks. I can definitely taste the calamansi, but the mouthfeel and flavor is very similar to like an emergency package,
What the
like that kind of fake.
calamari?
It's that fake citrusy taste. It's not very pleasant. I picked this up at an Asian market. I'm sure it has vitality and vigor for me, but yeah, I'm trying to get that taste out of my mouth. It's not a pleasant one.
Hot. Okay, don't drink it. It's just gonna
Speaking
be
of being hot and attractive, let's talk about how to attract people and our book.
Yeah, of course. So, in the last episode, we wrapped up talking about like how to create the best dating profile, which you were hypersensitive and you didn't want to take the advice because it sounded like every other dating advice book, which is completely fair. So, now we're going to move into how to properly date. We're going to talk about like how to not turn a first date into a job interview, because the vast majority of the time you're just trying to get the most amount of information that you can on this first date out of the person. And
I think the mistake a lot of people make is they're not using LinkedIn to date, because then you can have a first date and a job interview simultaneously.
that's very fair. Yeah. So a lot of people, the author says, who now we know is a woman, Logan. Many of my clients, desperate to find love, but also busy with other commitments, have managed to drain all of the flirtation and fun out of the experience of dating. Instead, they tend to engage in what they call evaluative dating or evalu dating, if you want to be cute about it. And evaluative dating isn't merely unpleasant, it's also a terribly inefficient way to find a long-term partner. So she goes on to talk about how you kind of shift your mindset in from evaluative to experiential. So what you want to do and is take these 10 steps that she lines up and move into more present dating. Just come up with a ritual. Take a shot, take a shot of tequila before your date, or come up with a list of questions that you think are good for this person. So the person put like, "Oh, I like hiking. Where do you like to hike?" Come up with things that make a conversation. Don't just come up with where'd you grow up? Where was your high school? What year did you graduate a college in? Like all these different more jobby sort of questions. Instead, ask questions about their interests. Ask questions that will keep the conversation going, keep it natural. Joel?
Doesn't that seem kind of evaluative, though?
I would say that I don't think coming up with a list of questions is just like, what if the conversation lags and you need more things to talk about? You have a list of questions.
I guess. But if there are
Uh,
things you're interested in that you think are going to make or break, that feels like you're evaluating them on those merits.
I wouldn't say talk about things that you're necessarily interested in. Talk about things that are on their dating profile. Like, oh, you have a picture of a fish. Do you like fishing? Things of that sort. Keep
As if men on dating profiles enjoy fishing, Naomi. I don't think I've ever seen a man on a dating profile indicate any interest in fishing, or fish for that matter.
I like fish. I like eating fish. I like sushi. Choose the second step is to choose the time and place of the date thoughtfully. So she talked about a client that she had that would only date people, his only time of day that he was available was before his day started. So he would go in for a 7-8 a.m. coffee date and be stressed about his upcoming day because he had like a 10:30 meeting or something. He'd be rushing off to the next thing. You want to choose a time when you're relaxed. You want to choose a place where or a place where you're excited to go. Choose the date thoughtfully so that you're, one, excited and relaxed, but also, two, you're not thinking about a million different things, work, family, things of that nature while you're on the date. You opt for a creative activity. So vast majority of the time you go for a movie or a dinner date or something. But why not go to axe throwing or things of that sort, so that you're doing an activity while you are on a first date, but you're also getting to know the person at the same time. It doesn't feel like an interrogation, which goes back to the first point, which is come up with a pre-date ritual. Come up with those conversation pieces, as well as get comfortable going on dates. Come up with something that you can do every single time to get you in the mindset of dating. Show your work.
If the idea is you need to be practicing dating, because I think she talked about in part 2 the importance of flexing your dating muscle and going out on lots of dates consistently so you don't lose the skill. It seems pretty expensive going out axe throwing several times a month. Like, I understand that there are benefits of doing activities over like coffee dates, but like one is objectively cheaper and like allows you to very quickly establish a connection at a low cost. I can understand why people do coffee dates.
To be completely fair, this woman she used to work at Google in San Francisco, so she has no concept of money.
This is Dr. Steve Bill Harvey all over again.
You picked this book, okay? That's all I'm saying.
Full disclaimer, yes, for our listeners, I did pick this book because people highly evaluated it on Amazon and Goodreads, and boy, I am seriously rethinking going off of customer reviews moving forward. Because amazing books like Why Women Deserve Less received a 4.8/4.9 stars. So clearly the people who vote for these things might not have the highest standards, we'll say.
Everybody likes Steve Harvey, and he wrote one of the worst dating books in history, so I really don't think that we can say anything about dating books and taking people's advice.
Whoa, Steve Harvey wrote Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus? I had no idea.
Gosh. So the next step you want to take is show your work. So this is step number 4. And basically what she means by this is show that you're wanting to be there. Show your effort. Show how you thought about the place that you're trying to go on this date. So, I researched this cocktail bar. I heard they have really great mezcal drinks, or Clinton came to. I don't know. Something where it shows your interest in the place, but also brings up the fact that you put effort into this date. You don't just come here every day and this is a daily routine for you.
I'll go one step farther. I think it's important that you put thought into it, but it be tied to one of the interests of the person's dating profile.
Okay.
Like, I'm thinking of, have you seen that Always Sunny episode about the dentist system? How like the sociopath main character like does the exact same technique every time of picking up women, where he like invites her to go get pizza at a neighborhood restaurant, but oh no, it's closed on the night that he like brought her to that place. So he invites her back to his place in order to eat pizza in his room. And that's when things get heated. And in the same way, like, I think a lot of women who've been dating for a while will get the perception that certain guys just have the exact same like technique down to a science for picking up women. And it's better to like indicate, assuming you're a male, that you've demonstrated some knowledge, read their dating profile, know they're into ice skating, know they're into hiking, know they're into painting or whatever, and plan an activity around that. That said, don't go on a hike on your first date.
Don't do
Most
that.
people don't like that. Either you might kill them or they might kill you. It's just a bad idea.
It's a matter of time about who's gonna kill who. It's honestly down to
Yes, that's true of all relationships. A lot of people don't know that. Relationships are like two crabs fighting for dominance in a little wading pool.
the next step for designing better dates is to play. So she goes over this earlier, and this doesn't take much time to explain, but have fun on those dates. Be silly. Don't think it has to be serious. Let loose a little bit. Let your true personality out. The next thing is skip the small talk, which we have talked about a lot. Like you want to get right into the nitty gritty. You don't want to talk about the weather. You don't want to talk about small, stupid things like that. You want to talk about, okay, why did you get into the career that you're in right now? Things of that nature. Don't just talk about the weather. Be interested, but not interesting. So you want to listen a lot. I've been on so many dates where the person just talks at me about themselves, and you can tell that they want to tell you is not listening to you. So you have to find the good equilibrium of you're talking and they're talking and you're getting to know each other, but it's not just one-sided. You want to listen and you don't want to overwhelm them with facts about yourself. Limit your phone use. End on a high note. So that doesn't always have to necessarily always be a kiss or a grand romantic gesture. Always ask for consent when giving a kiss, but end with a joke or, hey, let's do this again sometime. Things of unless you don't want to, don't say you're going to go on a second date if you're not going to, if you're not interested. End on things like that instead of walking away and feeling bad that you're not going home with them that night for some good loving. Use the post. Joel's giving me an awful look right now.
Sorry,
really wish...
we're going from like Steve Harvey, who used the phrase "give him the cookie" unironically, and you're using the phrase "good lovin'."
That was mine, not the
yeah,
author.
I don't know which is worse.
Use the post date 8 to shift to the experiential mindset. So post date 8 is 8 questions that you ask yourself after a first date or after the first couple of dates to really get in the mindset of, is this person really right for the next couple of dates that we're going to go on? If we've planned the next couple of dates, do I want to go on more dates with this person? So first question is, what side of me did they bring out? Did they bring out excited? Did they bring out anxious? Did they bring out anger? Do they bring out interest in me? Do I want to learn more about them? How does my body feel during the date? Stiff, relaxed, or something in between? Do I feel more energized or de-energized than I did before the date? Is there something about them that I'm curious about? Did they make me laugh? Did I feel heard? Did I feel attractive in their presence? Did I feel captivated, bored, or something in between?
I actually like this. This is good advice.
Yeah.
She's been giving a lot of very fluffy advice, and this is like a more critical perspective to help inform your judgment of people. I dig that.
I think we talked about this a little bit more, the fact that a lot of this information is just fluff. And I agreed with you in the sense that a lot of this could just be taken out. And I feel like if there was a simple, like, she puts tasks throughout the book and she says, like, oh, do an experiment with yourself, or, oh, take this quiz so you know, like in the first part, we talked about the hesitator and the romanticizer and all those different things. You take a quiz and there's like questions throughout the book and different experiments that you can do that she like kind of runs through the book. And I feel like if it was down to those topics and this list and a couple other things, this book would be like 5 pages and it would be better as a vlog. And that's just where I'm at right now in the book report.
Yeah, I feel a lot of people writing dating advice books are going to have to retread old ground that other people have discussed at length before, or they just risk putting together a pamphlet of like their top bullet points. So on one hand, like I can understand, yeah, you need to fill your book with some content to justify people paying, 15, $20 for it. But on the other hand, it's frustrating where people who want like quote unquote decent dating advice have to wade through the same tired stuff over and over again to get to some slight differences between one dating advice expert and another. I mean, frankly, I'm just disappointed, having read like 5 of these books already, that I'm seeing so many similarities, because it's just boring for us. There's not a lot of content we can talk about.
That's very fair. I get it. I think we just read too many dating advice books, and at this point, we just need to move on to another genre.
Romance novels.
Oh gosh, no. I think we have to go back to. She's more into smut. Okay, never mind.
I'm thinking, there's that whole genre on Amazon that's like sexy reptiles, where like women are being seduced by velociraptors. Exactly. That sounds like, Naomi, we should set some Patreon goals for episodes that are like, if we get $50 a month on Patreon, we will do the sexy velociraptor book review.
I think that's actually a really good idea. Listeners, you've heard it here first. $50 on Patreon. We'll do an episode about women having sex.
I'll even do the sound effects. He said, as she cowered in fear.
Oh, this is what we should do. We should just do an audiobook of it, but our own version of the audiobook. So like we do
that may run afoul of copyright. Like I think we actually have to be providing some constructive element to the work in order to not be accused of just plagiarizing. Maybe the audio drama version of Sexy Velociraptor is enough, but I think a discussion of Sexy Velociraptor is probably better.
That's very fair. Okay, so chapter 11 talks a lot about fuck the spark, and that's literally what it's called. The chapter is called fuck the spark. So we've heard this all before. Well, I don't know if you all heard it before, but I take the spark or the anxiety, the butterflies that you get before a date as not always a good thing. And she talks about the fact that fireworks and instant chemistry are often absent at the beginning of a relationship. When you get into a good relationship or a friendship or something, it's not always going to be sparks. The chemistry can build over time. And a lot of people think that, oh, if I don't have a spark with a person at the very beginning of a relationship, I'm never going to have that spark with this person. It's just going to be like boring the entire time. But the vast majority of people don't understand that you can build that spark, you can build that chemistry and build a beautiful relationship off of that. So she talks a lot about how the spark doesn't like always matter, and it's not always a good thing when you have a spark. I heard this quote many years ago by Halsey, where she was talking about the fact that her mom was giving her dating advice and how sometimes the butterflies that you feel for people, even over extended periods of time, are not necessarily butterflies. They're actually anxiety that you get around the person. And if you've been in a long-term relationship and they're still giving you butterflies, quote unquote, it could mean that that's your body's reaction telling you to like get away from that person because they give your body a lot of anxiety and stress.
They could also be poisoning you, or a really bad cook and they keep giving you food poisoning. And in both of those scenarios, you should also get out of there.
That is also very true. So the spark is not always a good thing. That feeling of chemistry may actually be anxiety. So she talks about this also, because the person doesn't make it clear how they feel about you. And sometimes the presence of a spark is more an indication of how charming someone is or how narcissistic, and less a signal of a shared connection. So you want to kind of ditch that spark and go for more of a slow burn. So I mentioned this early, like literally 2 seconds ago. You want to build that chemistry with a person instead of wanting that instant spark. So if you feel a spark, it doesn't necessarily mean the relationship is viable. And even if it leads you into a long-term relationship, it's not nearly enough to keep the relationship going, nor is it a sign that you're meant to be together. So Joel, can I ask you, why have you not gone on second dates with people?
As I'm in a committed relationship, my partner doesn't like that.
Okay, I'm talking about before you were with your partner. Why was a reason that you didn't go on a second date with someone?
I would say it was probably related to that initial spark, where like maybe it was the people I was attracting, but like a lot of women just would not talk about themselves.
Okay.
And I feel like I'm pretty good at giving them opportunities to do so, but I'd go out on dates and I'd be like, so what are you interested in? And get like a 1 or 2 word answer. And we're talking like Netflix, books. I watch movies sometimes, like very basic cursory stuff. And it was like they'd never like thought about what they were interested in, or like had to explain what they were interested in to other people. And yeah, like I didn't feel a spark after I had spent an hour trying to like peel the layers of their personal onion back. And I don't recall if I said anything explicitly like, hey, it's nice meeting you, but I don't think this is going to work out. I probably did once or twice, but most of the time I think the feeling was mutual and we just didn't go out on another date.
Okay.
I'll throw something in the ring, though, and I want you to really think about this, Naomi. We discussed a lot of movies on our podcast, and according to her, the most realistic depiction of a relationship is probably Marry Me, where Owen Wilson and Jennifer Lopez like aren't really like into each other at first, and then they grow on each other over time. Because Owen Wilson is just such an "oh shucks, oh wow" kind of guy, and she's
That's
like,
not true. What about? I guess we haven't talked about this on the podcast, but When Harry Met Sally.
well, yeah, we haven't talked about it on the podcast, but also like there was that initial spark, and then they are like, oh, well, actually, men and women can't just be friends. Let's bet about it, and they like go their separate ways, and there's that back and forth. I would say that's a good example of like love growing over time from like feelings of resentment and like uncomfortable whatever to breaking up at different points and getting back together. Like they really had to sell each other on the idea of a relationship.
So, chapter 12 is all about going on the second date. So, Logan pushes you to go on second dates with people, even if you don't feel a spark and on the first date. And she gives a couple of reasons why people don't go on second dates. So, she talks about the negativity bias, which is Helen Fisher, Helen Fisher came up with this idea of the negativity bias, a biological anthropologist and the author of several popular books on relationships. She explained that our brains have developed a negativity bias, an instinct to ruminate on what's gone wrong. So Fisher said that our brain evolved to vividly remember negative experiences so that we can avoid them in the future. This wiring helped us to perceive and avoid threats. If you almost got eaten by a saber-toothed tiger, it's helpful to remember what the animal looked like and where it lives. We have fewer flesh-eating predators around these days, but our brains still hold on to the modern equivalent. If you have 5 ex-girlfriends and one of them hates you, Fisher said, it's helpful to remember which one that is. So you kind of have this mentality on dates. If you had a bad first experience with the person, or you they had a couple of red flags, you don't want to go on that second date, which sometimes can be helpful. It can help make sure that, you don't get murdered or you don't go on a bad second date. But at the same time, it doesn't always necessarily mean that you shouldn't go on a second date. If you think like, oh, this person has bad breath on the first date, it could just mean that they didn't brush their teeth before the first date, which kind of is a red flag, because wouldn't you want to groom yourself before a first date? I don't understand how necessarily this goes into things, because now I'm thinking about it, I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. You should not go on a second date with someone if they're giving negative. You know what I mean?
I can sort of see the logic. It's the same way that like tests are meant to be like demonstrations of your knowledge, but like sometimes you'll take a test and like there'll be an area you didn't study and you know everything else for that one area, or like maybe you got a bad night's sleep because your neighbors were fighting and so you go in and you're less prepared and it's just kind of luck of the draw. I think the mentality of giving people a second chance so you can see if some aspect of them is like consistent or if it's just a one-off is helpful. But I'm also thinking of the gift of fear, where he's like, hey, your intuition knows like a shit ton more than like you consciously recognize. Sometimes if you just have an off feeling about people, go with the gut. Don't follow it up. I feel this is advice more for men seeking women than it is for women seeking men. Because I think in the same way that I demonstrated that I was incredibly shallow and wouldn't give people a second chance, I think a lot of men, like if they don't feel an immediate spark or like she's not as hot as she was in the photos, will drop the person they went out on a date with. And I think for women have, I think, reasonable reasons to be afraid of people who give them bad vibes, and so I don't know if this is the most helpful advice for them.
Very fair. Okay, I would agree with that. This is definitely not for women. The next thing that she talks about why people don't go on second dates is the fundamental attribution error. In addition to the negativity bias, we unconsciously fall prey to cognitive biases that make us bad judges of character. One such bias is the fundamental attribution error. Our tendency to believe that someone's actions reflect who they are rather than the circumstances. When someone makes a mistake, we interpret the misstep as revealing something essential and essentially bad about that person's character. We don't look for external reasons to explain the behavior. So, for example, you want to, if the person is late on the first date, you think, oh, this person doesn't care about me, but you didn't necessarily, let's just say you didn't ask. It could have just been that the person, was late because there was traffic and they didn't, there was, or they got in a car accident, or there's lots of different reasons. So to offset this, she wants you to look at the positive. She wants you to think of, oh, okay, kind of give a pros and cons list of the first date. He was late, but also he really asked about all of my interests and really looked into who I was as a person. He didn't he didn't drink, and I really like cocktails, but he paid for my drinks. I don't know, something like that. So you attributes of the date in order to think about, okay, or am I going to go on a second date with this person? The biggest thing that she gives, the last piece of advice that she gives, is remember that going on a second date does not mean commitment. Oftentimes when you think, okay, I'm going from a first date and transitioning into a second date, you think, okay, well, maybe I'll have to go on a third date and a fourth date and a fifth date, and I'll have to be in a relationship with them. Second dates, third dates, fourth dates don't mean commitment. It doesn't mean that you have to be exclusive with this person. It means you're interested, you want to see a little bit more of them, you move on in the conversation, you're getting away from that smaller talk, you're getting away from the initial conversations, you're getting into bigger conversations, things that actually matter, things that are going to give you more of an understanding of, do I want to be in a long-term relationship with this person? So then she goes into pet peeves. And this is an interesting conversation because I feel like a lot of people don't necessarily understand the difference between a pet peeve, a possible pet peeve, and a deal breaker. Because a lot of people are like, oh, this is a pet peeve of mine, and they don't understand that it doesn't have to be necessarily a deal breaker. So she defines these as: a pet peeve is a minor thing that an individual finds particularly annoying, perhaps more than other people do. So, a pet peeve of mine is when people chew loudly. What is your pet peeve, Joel?
I hate the smell of, I think it's chlorine from litter boxes. Like when it's like covering up the smell of something and there's just like a strong chlorine smell. I can't bear that. Like I am anal retentive about cleaning litter boxes just because I hate that smell so much.
Joel, I was talking about a pet peeve of a person on a first date, but okay.
Oh, that's fair. I like eye contact. It makes me think people have something to hide when like they can't look straight at me. I recognize that may also be anxiety, nerves, whatever, but yeah, it's not a deal breaker, but it's certainly something that I take note of.
Okay. The next thing that she goes over is which is a preference that feels like a deal breaker, but is really just a pet peeve. So my example of a pet peeve is people chewing too loudly. But in this case, a permissible pet peeve would be, I'm not going on a second date with this person because he chews really loudly. But I'm turning it into a deal breaker in that sense, because I'm like, he's perfect in every other way, but he chews way too loudly. I'm not giving this person a second chance because I'm thinking that, like, oh, this person could just chew quietly on the second date, but I'm turning it into something bigger than it actually is. Joel?
This is literally every episode of Seinfeld where Jerry Seinfeld is like, this is the perfect girl for me, but she has a problem.
What is that but all of How I Met Your Mother as well?
Oh, okay. I haven't really seen any of that. I mean, maybe they're playing that up for laughs and constructing a TV series around it. I don't know. It seems silly even saying something like chewing food is why I didn't go out on a second date with someone. I can understand that maybe you wouldn't want to spend the rest of your life doing that, but I think you could figure it out ahead of time if that's actually like a personal preference or a need.
Okay. Fair. The last thing that she goes over is an actual deal breaker, which is a genuine reason not to date someone. So a genuine reason not to date someone. They have a criminal record that's concerning. Not all people with criminal records it's concerning about. Okay, you have a drug charge or things of that nature, something small. If they've killed one of their ex-girlfriends, I would consider that a deal breaker. Joel, what's a
I'm
deal breaker for you?
I don't like this phrasing because if you don't want to spend time with someone, that is a genuine reason not to date them. Like, I might make fun of people for like saying the reason I didn't want to do this is X, Y, and Z. But yeah, if you're not connected to this person, if you don't feel a strong desire to continue the relationship, that's fine. The whole phrasing of genuine like really makes me think about consent and how like people frame consent conversations. Like, do you have a real good reason for like breaking up with that person, or are you just making it up?
Yeah.
And I think part of like feminism is the recognition that women sometimes have the ability to make choices without consulting other people or making choices that other people won't necessarily understand and agree with. Yeah,
Another dating book that Joel cannot stand. So the last topic that she talks about in the second part, the second section of the book, is how not to ghost. And I was kind of wanted to talk about this because I feel like I am definitely not a victim to this. What is the opposite? I'm a perpetrator of ghosting. I'm really bad at like not ghosting people. I am really pretty good about confronting people in real life situations when I have issues with them. At least I'd hope so. That's not always the case. It depends on the day. But I feel like when you have never met the person, but you just know that you're not going to, when I know I'm just not going to get along with them or they do something creepy, I'm going to blame it on being a woman and for safety reasons. But yeah, I'm pretty bad because I've ghosted a lot of people in my time. So she defines ghosting, and if the audience doesn't know what we're talking about, ghosting is where one party has the expectation of a response, but the other party has either blocked them or never intends of talking to them ever again. Um, and she gives some advice, and she says that in order to not ghost, you kind of have to like take on the two things that we talked about earlier, so the negative bias and the fundamental attribution error. And you have to think about like, okay, why am I doing this? Why am I not confronting this situation? Why am I not being truthful? And she pushes you to be truthful and to just end things on good terms and say like, hey, like I'm just not feeling this is why, and move on from the situation and do it in an adult way, which is, basic, courtesy. And you've heard this in every single dating book ever, like don't ghost someone. But I just want to like, let everyone know like this is, general courtesy. Even though I'm awful at doing it, I'm going to push this information out there. Be a good person. Don't ghost people unless you feel like you are at risk or of harm or things of that nature.
do what Naomi says, the author of this book says, not what Naomi does.
So moving into the third section of the book, which is the last section, it talks a lot about getting serious. So the first thing that she talks about is in the chapter 13 is decide, don't slide. So the vast majority of the people that get into serious relationships, and this is what this entire section is deciding to get into a long-term relationship rather than sliding into a long-term relationship. And the difference is when you decide versus sliding, you decide to get into a long-term relationship, you actively, consciously go to the other person, you say, okay, let's be exclusive, I really want to see you more often, versus sliding into a long-term relationship is you have spent a lot of time with them, you don't see seeing other people as an option, and you don't really have that intentional conversation of moving into it. You just kind of like, okay, this is how life is going to be now, and I'm not really going to think about it. I'm just going to go into it because this is just how life has been the last couple of months. I've only spent time with this person, and you slide into it. So psychologists describe two ways couples transition into the next stage of the relationship: deciding or sliding. Deciding means making intentional choices about relationship transitions like becoming exclusive or having children. Sliding entails slipping into the next stage without giving it much thought. This distinction matters. The National Marriage Project, an annual report on American marriages conducted by researchers at the University of Virginia, found that couples who make conscious choices to advance to the next stage of their relationship enjoyed higher quality marriages than those who slid into the next stage. Furthermore, researchers from the University of Louisville and the University of Denver found that individuals who tend to slide through relationship milestones feel less dedicated to their partners and engage in more extramarital affairs. These findings suggest sliding through decision points can put a relationship at risk. While relationships present many crucial decision points in this chapter, I'll help you introduce two of them: defining the relationship and moving in together. So when you define a relationship, she talks a lot about this person that this client that she had, Jing, who she had talked about earlier in the book, who was a hesitator, and they started dating for the first time at 31, which in our culture is kind of late for starting to date, like going on your first couple of dates, going on those exclusive dates and not just in like big groups like we would when we were younger. And after a few short romances, she began seeing a guy named James. She loved his friends. They were kind, welcoming, and hilarious, but most of all, she loved how quickly James had introduced her to them. She met his family shortly afterward at a rowdy Sunday party dinner with her mom, dad, sisters, and nephews, and she felt accepted. Finally, she thought she had found a relationship she'd been looking for. She goes on to explain that this woman, Jing, had been in this relationship for several months. She'd met the parents, she'd met the friends, and she felt like they were in an exclusive relationship, but they never had the conversation. So this would be an example of sliding. So in this conversation, you say, okay, we want to be exclusive, we want to be in a relationship, a long-term relation, we want to start a long-term relationship, so on and so forth. They never had that conversation. So she finds out months later that this guy had never deleted his dating apps, that he was still actively going on dates, and so on and so forth. And she felt really hurt because she thought they were in a committed relationship, but they never defined the relationship. So
I'm fascinated by the fact that apparently the family was like totally fine with this guy stringing her along. Like maybe there's more details she's not including, but like, yeah, I would assume that if you're introducing someone to your family thinks there's an exclusive attachment between you two.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't even think about that. But I think she gives good advice on how to define a relationship. She says, you may not get the response that you want when you're looking to find a relationship, but remember that this is a conversation and not a negotiation. You're not trying to push someone into a relationship that they don't want to be in. You're not trying to push someone into being exclusive when they don't want to be exclusive. And respect what the other person has to say. Listen. This is about learning how they feel, not persuading them to give you what you want. So the vast majority of the time throughout our lives, we're trying to get what we want as quickly as possible. But in these conversations, we need to understand that this is not a negotiation. This is completely about how two people feel about each other. And if one person is not feeling the same way as the other, that is not the correct way to start a relationship. It's a quick way to have the other person resent you or have a very quick relationship with the two. And she talks a lot about how couples kind of slide into this as well and how there's not a lot of communication. And especially Joel and I have talked on this podcast extensively about how in these types of situations, when you move in together, especially in this economy, you're sort of sliding into that decision because either one person is, one person needs a place to stay, their lease is ending, or they need to save money together, things of that nature. And they're not necessarily happy about these decisions long term because they slide into them. They're not intentional about the conversation that they have. It just kind of happens. I'm not saying this is always the case, but I would say that this can happen sometimes. In addition to discussing what moving in means to you, I recommend you talk about any fears or hesitations you have about this big change. So like I mentioned, when sliding, you don't necessarily have these big conversations. You kind of just let it happen. And I know for me, at least when I moved in with my partner, I discussed a lot of my hesitations and my fears about moving in with him before we moved in because I'm just anxious, and talking these things out helped me a lot to go along with this process. But I also think that helped us not slide because in the situation that him and I had, he was looking for a place to stay. His lease was ending and he didn't have another place to move into. So it would have turned into a sliding sort of situation if we didn't necessarily discuss those things before moving in.
Yeah. I am completely blanking on what I was going to say, but don't worry, we're going to cut all of this out in the edit. It'll appear I just jumped straight into whatever point my brain was trying to string together. Oh, here's my point that my brain was trying to string together. I think the platonic ideal for relationships is having a partner you can comfortably approach with a wide variety of like topics and just have a conversation with. But I recognize that like not every relationship is like that, and it can be
Yeah.
awkward approaching your partner with questions like that. It certainly feels like you're trying to force them into an obligation just by broaching a lot of topics. I would suggest, this is something Lauren and I discussed in the dating apps for couples episode we did a couple months back, trying something like Lovewick. Lovewick is an app where it gives you 10 questions a day to ask your partner, and you can just turn that into a habit of like when you're cuddling or something, you know, ask some questions. And they're from all sorts of topics, like, you know, what sorts of media influenced you as a child, what sort of relationship you have with your parents, like what do you see long term in this relationship. And a lot of those things about like what sort of outcomes people desire will inevitably come up in that process. And Lovewick can do random questions. You don't have to like oblige your partner and like talk about certain things, or if you want you can just focus on specific things like their views on sex, their views on children, their views on, you know, family relationships,
Yeah.
things like that.
Okay. No, I think that's really good advice.
I'm glad it took my brain that long to figure out what I wanted to say.
So, like I mentioned, she gives these like exercises to do throughout the book, and one of them is a list of questions that she thinks that you should ask before moving in with someone. She calls this exercise "Get aligned before you sign a lease." The first question is, "Why are we moving in together?" What does moving in together? The second question is, "What does moving in together mean to you?" The third is, "Where
To
do you
live
see-"
in sin. Second answer, to live in sin with you.
Yeah. Number three is, "Where do you see this relationship going in the future?"
Living in sin.
And is marriage something we're considering? If so, when do you see us getting married?
If we can continue living in sin, yes, and as soon as possible if that's the case.
Okay. And then number five is, what are your fears about living together? Not living in sin?
That we won't be able to continue living in sin. Like the sin will kind of be less like exciting.
Yeah. Okay. That's very fair. So this was all I wanted to talk about in this part. We're going to continue into part 4 in the next episode. But any last comments, Joel, before we wrap up this episode?
Oh my God, this book just keeps going.
I know.
I'm coming around slightly.
Okay.
I still think there's a lot of fluff in this,
Yeah.
but I think there are some kernels here, sort of structured approaches to thinking about a lot of different topics, and I can understand the value some people have placed upon this book. Simultaneously, the whole concept of dating experts kind of skeeves me out because it feels like you're taking advantage of people who are incredibly desperate, and you're giving them advice that's like helpful, but maybe not helpful enough to actually get them into a relationship, because once they're in the relationship, they're no longer using your services. Yeah, I don't know. I'll reserve my final judgment to the end of part 4.
Okay. Good shit. Well, yeah, keep collecting your analysis of this book, Joel, as you're listening to me do this book report, and we'll chat about them at the end of part 4. Hope everyone has a great week. Wear a condom. Get tested. Joel?
I hope you too can have a docent relationship with your partner.
That was disappointing.
Damn. Yeah, I really should have spent that entire hour we spoke thinking of a better pun. I'm sorry. I will never do this again. We have many thanks for the use of our theme music, which is the song Drop by Ketsa. You can find more of their music online at ketsa.uk. You can also find Date These Guys online on Twitter and Instagram at @DateTheseGuys, or visit datetheseguys.org. If you have questions for the podcast or want to be a wealthy sugar parent, please send an email to datetheseguys@gmail.com. If you'd like to support our work, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/datetheseguys. We behind-the-scenes information, early episode access, participation in polls, and exclusive access to a guy sibling map of date ideas for the Arizona area. Since the world sucks right now, we are currently donating all Patreon proceeds to trans organizations like the Trevor Project, a trans suicide prevention organization, and moving assistance funds for those fleeing states outlawing their very existence. Please consider becoming a member and supporting our work today.